So we check in with our guy, Rich Cimini, who covers the team, of course, for ESPN and ESPN.com to get the latest. Rich, it's Jake and Mike. We appreciate you joining us. And before we even talk about the current state of affairs with the Jets, it is Championship Sunday. I know you covered at least 3 Jets AFC Championship games. What's your fondest memory and your experience doing that?
Well, they didn't win any of them, as we know, but the fondest memory, well, that's a tough one. I mean, the one in Denver in '98 was the one that, I thought for sure they were going to win that game. I think it was about halfway through the third quarter, I turned to my Daily News colleague, Gary Myers, and said, I can't believe it, the Jets are going to the Super Bowl. And so we know what happened from that point on. I think the Broncos scored 20-something unanswered points, so you can blame it on me. But that was devastating. Parcells later told me that was probably the most crushing loss of his coaching career. And so on that cheery note, we could start our interview. But that was my memory. I thought that for sure. And they would have won the Super Bowl too, because they would have played Atlanta, and they had defeated Atlanta pretty handily earlier that year.
Mike and I talked about that game earlier. I think, Mike, you'd agree. Yeah, that one still stings.
Yep. Yeah, and earlier in the day, Atlanta had upset Minnesota, and I'm sitting there at halftime thinking, gosh, if we win this, we have a real chance in the Super Bowl. Everyone was so scared of Minnesota that year because they were so productive on offense. Chris Carter, Randy Moss, Jake Reed. Yeah, 0 for 3 in the big one there, Rich.
Yeah, that was the other. Look, I mean, the other games were called, the one in the Indianapolis, the Jets had a great start in that game, and then they go back the following year, and they got off to a terrible start against Pittsburgh, but rallied in the end. I believe that had that game been 2 minutes longer, I think the Jets would have overcome the Steelers in the end, but such is life. That's not the way it went.
To this day, refuse to watch the highlights from that game. Too much pain. As far as the current Jets go, Rich, what is your reaction to the news coming down on Friday? 7 assistant coaches were let go by Aaron Glenn. Let's start there, then we'll get into the Tanner Engstrand aspect of all this.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really surprised. I mean, we had been speculating for quite some time, for a few weeks that there would be significant changes on the coaching staff. So none of those names really surprised me at all. I think you and everybody who talks about the Jets and writes about the Jets pretty much had those names. And so, I know Aaron Glenn gets criticized a lot. I actually thought that was a positive, because what sense would it have made to run it back with the same coaching staff? That would be the definition of insanity, right? If you're doing the same thing and expecting different results. So he admitted some mistakes, going back to the Steve Wilkes situation at the end of the year, and he's trying to correct those mistakes. Now the trick is finding upgrades at those positions. That's going to be the challenging part.
And with Engstrand in particular, Rich, what are you hearing? There's some reports that he's going to have a different role. SNY reporting that the Jets are speaking with Frank Reich as a possible coach to add to the staff as a play caller. What is the latest there?
I haven't heard the Frank Reich one. I mean, of course, he knows Aaron Glenn. They were teammates in 1996. Maybe we could get Mo Lewis to come in as the defensive coordinator or something like that. I don't know about that, but Reich has been around the league. He obviously did not have much success at all in his last coaching stop. We know that. He didn't even make it through a year with the Panthers, but he did have success earlier as a play caller. I do believe they have not decided on that totally yet, on what to do with Engstrand. I think Engstrand will be back on the team, as we had all expected, but I do believe there will be a different role for him. Now, I don't know if they're going to hire a quote-unquote offensive coordinator. They may hire a new play caller under the guise of, an offensive assistant or a senior offensive assistant, one of those nebulous kind of titles. But I do think there is a pretty good chance that they will have a new play caller. I don't think they wanted to throw Tanner overboard. He's a young coach. He has a lot of promise, but, the offense was what it was. I mean, they were 29th in offense last year. I mean, it was bad. And I know there were some issues there with all the quarterbacks and the failed Justin Fields experiment, but the bottom line is the bottom line. It was not a good offense last year. So I do think he'll stick around. I just don't think it'll be as the guy on offense.
Yeah, and sometimes there's like a blending here, and just one small point of correction. His last stop, actually, he was the head coach at Stanford this year. He filled in on an interim basis for
that's for luck.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, Mike. I was referring to the NFL and the Panthers situation, but you are correct.
That's okay. After 16 years of you correcting me, it's nice for me to once in a while, try to.
Yeah, we should a little role reversal.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the question?
Yeah, no. So my point, Rich, was like sometimes you see, like I was saying earlier to Jake, like there's definitely a push in the league to like, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but it just kind of is the trend of like all these chopped up like titles of run game coordinator, pass game coordinator. So do you think there's a scenario where there's a title or two where maybe he's coming in as the pass game coordinator or a senior assistant or something like that where, again, Jake, some of this discussion is really hard because we don't know how all these seats are going to be filled or the titles over the next 10 days.
You're right, exactly. Well, they obviously have a vacancy as a passing game coordinator because that was Scott Turner's job. So, they could bring in a Frank Reich or someone of his ilk in that title and have him, calling plays or so forth. I would think a guy like Frank Reich, who's done a lot in this league, wouldn't come to the Jets unless he were given the play calling responsibility. So, that's going to be something that'll have to be massaged by Aaron Glenn and trying to figure this out. I think he's just trying to get a new direction. I mean, these next couple of weeks, of course, you got the Senior Bowl coming up this week. There's going to be a lot of it's like a job fair basically down there. A lot of interviews, a lot of backroom, negotiating going on down there, as you know, Mike. And so I think these positions will get filled over the next couple of weeks, like, before the Super Bowl, perhaps even after the Super Bowl, because he's got a lot of interviewing and a lot of positions to fill, that's for sure.
Rich Cimini is our guest here on New York Game Day. Check out his podcast, Flight Deck, as well, Jet fans. Rich, where I struggle with all this, because I agree with you, these changes to the assistants had to happen, but you already have to replace your defensive coordinator, and whether or not Engstrand is technically the OC, if he's not the play caller, he's being demoted, he's being, essentially replaced there. Like, Aaron Glenn touted these guys. He talked about how he had this great coaching staff that was going to coach up guys and develop them. Like, how poorly does it reflect on Glenn, and what confidence should any Jet fan have that they're going to be able to get capable coaches here when the perception of Glenn is that if he doesn't win games, he could be out of a job at this time next year?
Well, obviously it doesn't reflect well on him. I mean, I think you have 20-something coaches on your coaching staff, and 8 of them are already gone. So that's not a good percentage. I mean, typically there's always turnover from a first-year coach. Saleh changed 6 coaches after his first year. However, there were no coordinators and only one position coach changed. Most of them were low-level assistants. So there's always going to be a little bit of change. This is excessive, clearly, with 8 changes. And you're right, Jake. I mean, it shows that there may have been a flaw in his hiring decisions. Clearly something wasn't right. I think there's nothing. I mean, the worst you can do is 2 rights, 2 wrongs trying to make a right. And so I think rather than running it back and being stubborn and trying to, prove to people that his coaching staff is good, he recognized that there were some deficiencies, some obvious deficiencies that me and you and Mike and everybody else who follows the Jets has recognized, and he's trying to do something about it. It's costing Woody Johnson money. Obviously, they're having to eat some of these contracts, but it's just part of him trying to get things back on the rails because it went off the rails last year. And you're right. I mean, it is a poor reflection of the head coach because he made these decisions, but it would have been even poorer if he just sat there and did nothing.
Yeah, I would just kind of echo that. Like, again, just knowing Aaron Glenn the way I do, like, no one's going to be harder on him than himself, and I think this is, like, one of those ways to manifest it. And I would think this is higher than normal league-wide, but I think if we went back and looked over the last 5 years at all first-time head coaches, like, you'd be surprised how many changes. This is probably on the higher end of that bell curve, but it does happen. And one of the other things, too, that, like, is – just what the facts are, which I don't necessarily agree with, but like these staffs are enormous. And it's just hard to hire 25 people and go 25 for 25. But that's just, again, the trend in the league. Do you think the size of the staff, Rich, will change? Do you think it'll shrink at all, or you think it'll come back in a from a size standpoint, about the same?
I think about the same. I think it was like 21 or 22 on staff. Staffs have gotten so much bigger nowadays. It's interesting. I went back and checked the Lions, because we know Aaron Glenn often references that 2021 Lions team where he was the DC under Dan Campbell, and we Jet fans heard, ad nauseum, I would say, throughout the year about the comparisons. So I went back and checked to see what Dan Campbell did after his first year, and he made 3 changes. One of them was his offensive coordinator. It was Anthony Lynn, who didn't get it done that first year, and they fired him, and they promoted Ben Johnson, which obviously turned out to be a brilliant move. And they changed 2 other position coaches. So it was only 3 changes for Dan. As bad as the Lions were that year, which is 3-13-1, Dan Campbell only made 3 changes. Here you have Aaron Glenn making 8. So you're absolutely right. I think is way high on the bell curve. But look, he'll get another chance to. He's getting another chance to make this right. And if they have the same kind of year they just had, then someone else is going to be in that seat making these, hiring in a completely new coaching staff. And Jake alluded to this a little bit earlier about how hard it is to try to find coaches when everyone knows, the head coach is on the hot seat. And you're right. It absolutely is a factor when you're trying to hire coaches, because, especially a defensive coordinator, because the head coach is a defensive-minded coach, who's coming off a 3-14 season. So I'm sure there are coaches out there who are looking at the Jets as not the most attractive job, but I do think they're going to end up with Wink Martindale. He was in town yesterday for a second interview in person. I think they've had Wink at the top or near the top of their list since late December, and I would be surprised if he doesn't end up as the guy.
What would be your thoughts if Wink is the DC? And I've seen some Jet fans make the comparison, hey, his stock's been trending down. He's been out of the NFL. It's similar to Steve Wilkes a year ago, which we know was a disaster. Your thoughts on Wink as a DC option for Glenn?
Yeah, I don't think it's a fair comparison. The Steve Wilkes, why, just because they're older coaches? I don't think that's a fair comparison. Steve Wilkes never had to show me any point in his career where he had success as a defensive coordinator. At least Wink has had success as a defensive coordinator. He had 3 great years with the Ravens. I think it was 18, 19, and 20. He had 1 year with the Giants where, they did make the divisional round of the playoffs, with Dable, and then things kind of went off the rails the second year there, and he ended up leaving. Obviously, he had a falling out with Dable, and that didn't go well, and then went to Michigan for a couple of years. So I think, my initial thought when I heard Wink, I'm like, there's no way that's working with Aaron Glenn. You're talking about 2 alpha personalities, and I thought that would be like just a clash, just no way. But the more I investigated it and talked to some people, I think it possibly could work there. I think Wink has come to the realization now that he's not going to be a head coach in the NFL. I think he's given up on that possibility. So I think he's very satisfied with being a defensive coordinator, and I think it would work. I think it could work well. I've talked to people who know him, and I think he's willing to work under the structure. He would have total control of the defense, and I think it has a chance of working. He's a good coach. We know he's like-minded in that he is a blitz-heavy coach. And so, yeah, out of the league 2 years, yeah, that's a little bit of a concern. But I don't think it's, like 10 years or something like that. I think he could get back in without missing a step. So I think that would be a pretty good hire for the Jets. I personally would like to see Jim Leonhard get the job. A younger, innovative type guy who also would run a pressure-heavy defense. But he's still coaching today. The Packers just filled their job with Jonathan Gannon. I thought Leonard could end up with the Packers. He could end up with the Giants, actually, Jim Leonhard back with John Harbaugh. So I think that would be a good hire for the Jets, but I do think they'll end up with Wink when all is said and done.
Just to add to that, and again, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I love Jim Leonhard. He played for us as tough as they come and really just kind of the glue of the defense. But one of the calculations is hey, if we're happy where we are in Denver, and I want to be a coordinator in the NFL. Like, is it reasonable that, Vance Joseph this year or within the next year or two will become a head coach again? So sometimes, like, you see guys say, hey, you know what? I'm playing the long game. I'm going to stay where I am.
Yeah, absolutely. He could end up staying there or getting promoted if Vance Joseph gets one of these jobs. And one of the other things about Wink that I want to make about possibly how their personalities are going to mesh, I think Aaron Glenn has clearly established that he wants to be a CEO type coach. I don't think he's not a hands-on X's and O's, get involved in each different unit. Whereas I thought Dable, was more of a hands-on coach, and got involved in the nitty-gritty type stuff. So I think the CEO type coach would blend better with Wink than, say, he did with Dable. So that's another thought on how maybe those two alpha personalities could get along together. And, we'll find out. I mean, I thought possibly something could happen yesterday with Wink, but, maybe the Jets are waiting to see how the Broncos do today and maybe make another run at Jim Leonard.
Last one, Rich, because we're up against it. Got about a minute left. Just curious your thoughts as someone who covered, of course, Robert Saleh with the Jets. What were your thoughts on seeing him getting another chance to be a head coach now with the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly a smaller market, I think, works better for Robert. I think a lot of his problems in New York just stemmed from handling the media and dealing with the constant scrutiny. I thought he didn't handle that particularly well. Maybe different in Nashville. He's got a young quarterback with a lot of promise that he can build around. I know that he's pretty excited about that. Now, for him, it's going to be hiring a coordinator. Now, we see I thought Arthur Smith was going to end up with – we know he tried to hire Arthur Smith a couple of years ago for the Jets, and he ends up at Ohio State. So if Dable gets one of these head coaching jobs, I don't know who Saleh is going to go with as his OC. And to me, that's going to be a very, very important decision for him if he wants to get this off on the right note. So I thought that was an interesting hire. I was a little surprised they hired a defensive-minded coach, especially with such a young, promising quarterback. But, we'll see if Saleh learned from his mistakes and can get it together there in Tennessee.
Rich, we appreciate you joining us. Thanks, as always, for your time.
All righty, guys. Enjoy the games today.
Thanks,
Take
Rich.
care.
800-919-3776. The Jets continue to be the New York Jets. Aaron Glenn on Friday fired 7 assistant coaches, including the quarterback coach, including the senior offensive assistant in Scott Turner. Most staff members of the defense were fired. And then Aaron Wilson of KPRC down in Houston, longtime NFL reporter, he's the one who broke this story. He had all the assistants being fired by Glenn. And then he reported that Tanner Engstrand, the offensive coordinator for the Jets, his role will, quote, be changing. And I'm thinking to myself, what? So the Jets, who already fired Steve Wilkes, who was an abject failure, it was a disaster. The defense was as bad as any Jet defense we've ever seen. And that included when they had Sauce and Quinnen. It did not make a difference. Wilkes couldn't even make it through the year. So Glenn fires him. Now you have 7 assistant coaches that are being fired. And Engstrand, the offensive coordinator, while he wasn't fired, he will reportedly remain on the staff. He's not going to be the play caller. Connor Hughes of SNY reported that Engstrand is not going to be the play caller, and the Jets have spoken with Frank Reich to be added to the staff to call plays. And does anyone think any of this is normal? Again, Aaron Glenn was the most obvious one-and-done hire we have seen in years in the NFL. Every metric tells you he has no idea what he's doing. He was supposed to hire a great staff. He hired an abject disaster staff in all aspects, minus the special teams coordinator. There's nothing normal about what we're watching here. He claims to have this master plan. What type of plan is firing 7 assistant coaches and replacing both coordinators after 1 year? Well, they laid the foundation this year. They didn't lay anything. They just stunk. Historically stinking. They went 3-14. They started 0-7. Then they beat 3 backup quarterbacks after that 0-7 start and then lost the year, breaking an NFL record by losing by 23 or more 5 consecutive weeks. And we're putting this on Tanner Engstrand, who at times actually showed some creative ability to scheme guys open, but you handed him Justin Fields and an injured Tyrod Taylor and Brady Cook. Again, if Aaron Glenn's going to blow up his entire coaching staff after a year, why is he still the head coach of the Jets? What evidence do we have that Aaron Glenn has any idea how to hire a good staff? And now everyone knows he's a lame duck coach. What qualified assistant coaches are dying to be on the New York Jets coaching staff in 2026? I mean, this is as bad as it has ever been for the Jets. There is absolutely no hope going forward. The only hope you get, this is the positive spin now from Jet fans. Well, if we're as bad as everyone knows we're about to be, we have 3 first-round picks in 2027, and Arch Manning and a bunch of other top QBs will be in the draft next year, and hopefully we can get one of them and pair that guy up with a new coach. I mean, that's the positive spin. But then you got to rely on Woody Johnson to actually hire the right coach. Good luck with that. I don't know how anyone could feel good about things. And look, Aaron Glenn definitely needed to move on from some of these assistants. I think I was the first one on this radio station to bring up the fact that the quarterback coach that Aaron Glenn hired to, quote, coach up Justin Fields, who, according to the head coach, has never been, quote, coached up properly, is a former running back who has predominantly only coached running backs until he started coaching QBs a few years ago in Charles London. So he's gone. That makes sense. But Engstrand's gone too. We knew Wilkes was gone. But again, if you're going to fire both coordinators and 7 other assistants are going to be fired, which is a unusual number, right? Everyone compares Glenn to Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell made 3 staff changes after year 1. Aaron Glenn's making 7 assistant coach changes, plus a coordinator on defense, that's 8, and Engstrand's on the staff, but he's being demoted. That's really 9. 9 changes to the coaching staff after a year. The volume of changes suggests the Jets are starting over. So what did they really do in year 1? What progress was made? They're giving Glenn another chance. Why bother? Everything I could point to, whether it be my eyes, historical evidence, results, points to the fact that this is not turning around, that we as Jet fans are just going to sit here and waste another year when there were all these coaches available. Oh, but Jake, who'd take the job? What a loser mentality to have. Who'd take the job? I don't know. You have the 2nd pick in the draft. You have the 16th pick in the draft. You have the 33rd pick in the draft. You have the 44th pick in the draft. You got 3 first rounders next year. And oh yeah, each of the next 2 years, you're projected to have the most cap space in the NFL if you combine the 2 years. You have a good offensive line. You have a number 1 receiver. You have 2 pass rushers on defense. They're not just completely bereft of talent, despite what the narrative is. Good coaching can turn this around. So now the Jets are completely starting over with both their coordinators. The head coach is giving you no indication he has any idea what he's doing. And the name you're hearing for defensive coordinator is Wink Martindale, who's a name. But hiring Wink Martindale feels like you're just repeating the same mistake that the Jets made with Steve Wilkes. I just don't get Aaron Glenn's process here. Wilkes was an experienced coordinator whose stock was trending down, and he had been out of the NFL. And that's exactly where Wink is right now. He was bad at Michigan. His numbers with the Giants were not great. I question the personality fit with him and Glenn. His scheme is outdated if you talk to any football people. And even if the Jets are not a top destination for the reasons I've outlined with Glenn, take a swing on a younger, higher upside option at DC, because that's the only way you're going to be able to overachieve next year if you're Aaron Glenn and save your job. This just doesn't make any sense. Wink Martindale, in his most recent stops, was not very good. Even with the Giants, he had that run with Tommy DeVito. They were winning games and forcing turnovers. But all the advanced numbers tell you there was flukiness to that. Wink Martindale has not had an elite defense since 2020. His DVOA with the Giants in 2023 was 21. In 2022 was 30. In Baltimore, his last year there was 28. The last time Wink had a great defense was 2020. They were 6. And that's just on defense. Now the name you're hearing on offense is Frank Reich. Here's the problem with Frank Reich. He hasn't been in the NFL in a couple of years. Like, does anyone see this working? The Jets just getting 2 older former coordinators to come back into the NFL? And it's going to work out? I mean, if you go with Wink and Reich as your two coordinators, right? Because I guess Engstrand, while demoted, might still have the OC title technically. You're going with a new defensive and offensive play caller, both in their mid-60s, who have not been in the NFL in multiple years, who have not had any success in the NFL in 5+ years. And for those who don't remember, while Frank Reich was the OC on that Eagles team that won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, he wasn't the play caller. That was Doug Peterson. And Frank Reich obviously had a stint in Indianapolis where it didn't work out. Not all his fault. He was supposed to have Andrew Luck, who then retired, but it didn't work out in Indy. And he didn't make it through his first year in Carolina. He was one and done. Again, Glenn's coaching for his job, so he had to make changes to his staff. But again, when you fire 7 assistant coaches and you're replacing, on top of that, both coordinators, what was done in year one? You're starting completely over, coming off a 3-win season. And of course, because it's the Jets, you never get the luck you need. There's only one quarterback that's worth drafting at the top of the draft, and he's going to go number 1 in Las Vegas, and the Jets will be there at 2. And they can find a good player, sure, but not a player who's going to impact winning to a point where you're going to have a fun season next year, Jet fans. It's helpless. Look, the positive for the Jet fan right now is, hey, if we stink, we start marching for Arch. And, they're going to stink, all right. All right, we march at dawn. I'm getting my boots on after the show to start marching in the snow. I mean, it is just straight up depressing. It really is. For Woody Johnson to sit here with 10 openings around the league and keep Aaron Glenn, it is the ultimate slap in the face to the Jet fan. It really is. Because this guy has no plan. He's going to hire a great staff. He boasted about all these guys. That was the thing. Glenn kept so many of the same players from a year ago because he talked about essentially how Saleh's staff was horrifically coached. And guess what? They were. And then he came in and is like, oh, you thought that was bad. Watch this. And he made it worse. Again, I don't think Tanner Engstrand is Sean McVay, but I didn't think he was as bad as Aaron Glenn was or Steve Wilkes was. And you can't tell me Frank Reich is an upgrade over Engstrand. If you actually watch the games, you saw a guy who did scheme some guys open. There was some creativity. I'd give him an incomplete. But does Glenn have any plan? He's demoting Engstrand, really? And Wink Martindale is just a white Steve Wilkes. And the way the media is shaking their ass to get Wink Martindale on the Jet staff, here's the dirty little secret. Wink talks to these guys. He's got relationships with these guys, or his agent does. They all want a source in the Jet building. So when the Jet season implodes, they could get the exclusive with Wink on what happened. No one else is interviewing Wink Martindale to be a defensive coordinator. No one. No one's interviewing Frank Reich to call plays. No one. And there were 10 vacancies in the NFL for head coach. And the Jets are going to settle with 2 guys in their mid-60s to go with their older head coach who's coming off a 3-win season. Where are we supposed to feel good about anything with the Jets right now? What are we supposed to feel good about? There's nothing. Then you look across town, and the Giants have a real coach, a real leader. They will be in the playoffs next year. You heard it here first, Giant fans. They will turn things around quickly with John Harbaugh. And I just hope, as a Jet fan, Woody is stewing, watching all the attention the Giants are about to get, all the positive coverage they are getting. And I truly hope this is the wake-up call that this owner finally gets to either, 1, sell the team, which we know won't happen, or 2, hire a real coach. All right, Leon Hess finally woke up and said enough and got Bill Parcells. Mike Tomlin will be out there a year from now. Kevin O'Connell could be out there. Even Shane Steichen could be out there, an offensive coach for your quarterback. They cannot continue to hire these first-time defensive-minded coaches. And again, Glenn does not even call the plays on defense. The fact that this DC hire is so important tells you all you need to know about where we're at. If we can't trust Aaron Glenn to at least fix his defense, what does he do? He doesn't do anything well as a head coach. No one can answer the question. Oh, he hired a good staff. No, he didn't. He didn't do anything. Oh, my goodness. It has been as bad as it has ever been to be a fan of the Jets. Then we got to watch the Patriots in the AFC title game a year after they were worse than the Jets. And they won and done their head coach. But no, you got to keep Aaron Glenn. Anytime you have the opportunity to keep the worst head coach in the National Football League, you got to do it. Remember, Mike McCarthy, he got hired yesterday by Pittsburgh. Wasn't good enough for the Jets to even interview last year, but he's good enough to replace Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. Great. You can't make it up. 800-919-3776. More on the Jets, more on the Giants. Championship Sunday. We get to your calls, but it sounds like the Jets are going to hire Wink Martindale and Frank Reich as their new coordinators. Yippee. What a plan. More coming up. It's New York Game Day on 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app.